Since 2003, this is the Sports Source, East Tennessee's #1 sports talk show.
Brought to you by Junk Be Gone and the Garza Law Firm.
With your host, John Pennington. The Sports Source starts now.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome into the Sports Source. Happy to have you with us. Happy New Year. Tennessee basketball, hopefully their new year will be more like the last year, at least December. Yesterday, not great. We'll get into that. We'll discuss the basketball team. We've still got football to talk about. A little bit of news leaked out regarding the investigation this week. We'll talk about who's involved in the internal investigation, who's on Tennessee side, and what that might mean. Plenty of stuff to cover today over the next 90 minutes. So let's jump in and start with our basketball conversation. First segment of our program is brought to you by the Garza Law Firm. If you're watching television around East Tennessee, you see so many ads for attorneys. Some of these groups, you've never even heard of them. Well, that's because many of them aren't actual local attorneys based here in Knoxville. They're based in Nashville, Memphis, Birmingham. They want you to think they're from here. Marcos Garza is Knoxville. He is a neighbor. And when you need an attorney, that's who you call. Call a local attorney that's right here in East Tennessee. Marcos Garza and the Garza Law Firm. Check out garzalaw.com this week. All right. Want to welcome in the first round of panelists today. We have right here former Vol basketball coach and former NCAA Division I player, Mark Pankratz. Mark, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Right there, we have Jimmy Hines from WNML AM and FM. Thank you, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Right down there, longtime sports writer in this community and man about town, Chuck Cavaleris. Chuck, thanks for joining us.
What an intro. I like that,
Yeah,
John.
man about town. Gadfly. All right. Today's show, it was all put together and put to bed before Tennessee even tipped off yesterday. I mean, what can change? You got 7 games. You know what they're going to do. Smothering defense, efficient on the offensive end. Rookie's going to look good. And then I had to wad it up. And then I got it out of the trash. And I thought, let's just do the same show, except we'll reverse engineer what went wrong yesterday in Tennessee's 71-63 loss to Alabama. So let's start with the defense. Absolutely had been smothering, suffocating, had just taken teams out of games early, as they did at number 12, Missouri, a Missouri team that then won at Arkansas yesterday. Tennessee went out there and just smothered them, killed them right off the bat. What happened yesterday, Mark? What happened to the great smothering, suffocating defense yesterday?
Yeah, well, like anything, you'd want to be able to figure out it just be one thing, but there was multiple things, whether it's Pons getting in foul trouble, Springer getting injured, and then some X's and O's type things that they did. They spread us out. They were going 5 out, and they really exposed Vescovi off the dribble and Fulkerson. They would do ball screens or slide-by ball screens to get the switches that they wanted, and then they would attack. And all of a sudden, when they're making threes, now all of a sudden we got to press up a little bit. Guys are extending out on their own man and off the ball defense, opening up driving lanes, and they started attacking us. And yes, a couple times Pons was able to come and erase some things in a spectacular way, but that got our defense really off kilter. And then our offensive struggles, it didn't allow us to counter that and keep us in the ball game close enough to pull it out at the end.
All right, next question. This is one that every Vol fan is thinking. Did they expose something that you're going to see the rest of the way from other teams?
Well, I think the uniqueness of Alabama is they are so small. You look at Arkansas and you would like to say, okay, well, maybe they go 5 out and they really start to drive us, but they're just a bigger ball club. I think there can be some things like getting Pons in foul trouble, forcing Fulkerson off the block and making him score from more of the perimeter, and then so our ball screen defense. And so some of those things, yes, but Alabama is a little bit unique in their lack of size. But there's some things personnel-wise that teams are going to try to expose.
Jimmy, your thoughts on what you saw yesterday?
I saw a little of this against Missouri, and I know Tennessee dominated Missouri, but I thought Missouri at times with their guards was able to penetrate. And while they weren't always scoring, they were getting to the foul line a lot. And that on-ball defense, at times during Missouri was a little bit of a concern. It was a much greater concern against Alabama because I thought Alabama had its way driving to the basket. And then when they didn't, they were hitting the threes. So Tennessee actually took more three-point attempts than Alabama, and Alabama scored 18 more points on three-pointers. I didn't think the defense played well at all. Pons was on the bench. He had 5 blocks, but he got in foul trouble. I didn't think John Fulkerson had a good game at all. But I was surprised a little bit by Tennessee, in my opinion, not doing a very good job with their on-ball defense.
It was interesting, and I think Jimmy Dykes talked about it as well, that there in the first half, Tennessee was kind of determined, all right, we're not going to collapse on the guy who's driving here and give up with these wide open threes, which is what Alabama wants. Alabama had such success driving, they said, okay, let's change that in the second half, and then they start raining in their threes. So it's pretty much anything Alabama wanted to do yesterday, they made it happen. Chuck, you've said on this show several times, even when Tennessee was winning, that, okay, the defense is great. What happens on a night when the defense fails you? Do you have enough shooters to win games? Your thoughts on what you saw yesterday?
Well, you certainly didn't seem to. I mean, and then Victor Bailey was your leading scorer, and he's not one of your best defensive players. Santiago Vescovi, he was up there in scoring. He's not one of your best defensive players. So, I mean, it's like this contradiction in how you're going to be able to win games like this. And as bad as it was, guys, Tennessee still had a chance down the stretch, but they still couldn't get the ball in the hole. And I get irritated constantly seeing somebody get the ball to the rim like that. You can't just count on Pons blocking the shot all the time. Where's somebody trying to take a charge, or where's somebody trying to man up and show a little bit of grit? I mean, we still don't know if Alabama has a mid-range game because all they did was make layups and threes, you know? But, I mean, on offense, I know as much as Rick Barnes preaches defense, don't you have the feeling they need to work a little bit more on offense and get something going?
Well, it seems that his three best teams, including this one, have been, and it's, you know, you're talking about a Gonzaga if you're saying, wow, they are great offensively and great defensively. But the first great team he had here was mainly a defensive squad. And then they had Kyle Alexander get hurt in the NCAA tournament, and you get upset by Loyola Chicago. The next year, you're number one in the nation, but the defense wasn't as strong. It was more of an offensive team. This year, you're more defense, and it's just you'd like to see that needle dead center. That's hard to do.
Yeah. Well, I know we're saying they're more defense, but they're a team that scored 100 points in back-to-back games. I mean, they've shown that they can score offensively. The difference was...
But do you expect that against SEC competition? I mean, it's one thing to do that against some of the teams they faced.
Yes, but from an offensive standpoint, they had an off night. There was in foul trouble. I think Jordan Springer, as much as we talk about, or Jaden Springer, as much as we talk about Pons, Jaden's a guy that can get to the basket, can finish at the rim, and is a very good on-ball defender. You had some things. Fulkerson is not going to have games like that. They're better offensively than we're giving them credit to. Yes, they got to find some perimeter scoring.
All right. Let me ask you this one. We've talked about this off air. I can't remember if we've ever done this on air, but you're from the Chicagoland area. There's a different view of basketball seasons outside the SEC. Down here, we kind of look at it like football, and that is any loss is a season-ruining, season-defining, destructive event. Whereas you looked at yesterday and said, you're going to have some of those. They're coming. Kansas yesterday lost by 25. That was a team that was number 3 in the country. Lost by 25.
At home.
Yeah. So there is a tendency to overreact to these kind of losses.
Well, and especially
down here among us.
Yes, in a football climate, coming off of some of the football seasons we've had, say the last 15
Right.
years.
Yeah.
So you already have some negative taste coming out of your mouth, and then you have one of these games, you feel like the season is over. Look, we always try to win the SEC championship. You try to win every game. But the NCAA tournament, if you go back, and I think we've talked about this in the past, if you go back and think about, okay, who are the last 15 SEC champions, you probably can't think of as many as you can think of who are the last 15 NCAA champions. There's a lot more teams that are remembered by what they do in the NCAA tournament. Sure. Elite 8, Final 4, those Sweet 16, they're talked about more than if you win the SEC championship. You want to win every game. This is one learning opportunity that I think will pay dividends in the future.
There was a lot of talk earlier. I saw somebody sent me a note about Final Four. I said, just go ahead and say it. This is a Final Four team. There aren't 4 teams in the country better than Tennessee. Whether that's true or not, if you've watched college basketball and watched the NCAA tournament, having the most talent doesn't matter on a given night. Tennessee's got more talent than Alabama. It didn't matter yesterday. If it's all about the 4 best teams make it to the Final Four, then Loyola Chicago wouldn't have been there. And I could go through a long list going all the way back George Mason, further in NC State in '83, wherever you want to go. my point in this is I don't feel one bit more encouraged or more discouraged about this team's NCAA tournament chances after yesterday, because you're going to have those days. That's my view. Your thoughts on, did yesterday's game impact your view of how far this team can go in March?
Not so much how far they can go in March, but I was disappointed again on the on-ball
Right.
defense.
Yeah.
I think that's a concern. And so if Alabama wasn't driving it, they were shooting open threes. I thought Tennessee would be better on-ball defense. I usually think of rebounding and defense being more consistent than offense. I can understand an off day offensively, but defensively and rebounding, usually you see that on a consistent basis. That bothered me a little bit. Now, we'll see going forward whether they get that corrected. But again, I thought Missouri penetrated on Tennessee quite a bit as well also. So that to me is a little bit of a red flag.
But I think you can neutralize that smothering defense if you spread the court. And you got three-point shooters. You know, we talked about that last week. I mean, I think a lot of defenses are vulnerable to that. And Tennessee, if you're going to play Rick Barnes basketball, you need to get back to inside out. The ball needs to go into the post, even if you kick it back out. And then that's where you're going to get some things going again, I think.
All right.
I think one of the biggest differences yesterday is when they took the lead, their point guard controlled tempo more. Vescovi got sped up by their quicker guards. You saw that with some of his off-balance layups that got blocked.
Right.
That's a concern for me. I've said rebounding and point guard play. Yes, we've got bodies, but as far as true point guard, running the show, demanding, because that'll lead to what we'll talk about in the next segment. But that leadership at the point guard position, Vescovi's not even a full year into his time at Tennessee. That's a place I think we got to get better.
They quick shot too much on offense too, I thought.
Well, and remember, we went into the season debating whether or not Vescovi was going to be your point guard. Who's going to be your starting point guard? And it's been him for the most part, but the idea that it's going to be him for the rest of the way, questionable. I think it was interesting that's one that we focused on early. 7 wins, and it kind of went out the window. Now you have a loss, and it's like, okay, let's talk about the point guard again, going back to where we were. All right, when we come back, Tennessee's offense. Mark wanted to talk about the efficiency on offense. Well, they weren't very efficient yesterday, but let's discuss why they have been and why they weren't. That's next on the Sports Report. Call back.